250,000. That's the number of tons of steel currently floating in the ocean, arranged into the shape of a ship called Icon of the Seas. To put that in perspective, it weighs more than the Eiffel Tower 40 times over. It's longer than the Titanic, and the Empire State Building laid end to end would still leave room to spare. And somehow, this impossible object also has an ice rink, a 10-story water slide, a neighborhood called Thrill Island where you can walk off a plank 150 feet above the sea. It carries more people than most towns. It burns fuel most ships have never touched. And 2 people have died connected to it since it entered service. This is the story of how something this big gets built, how it stays afloat, what it's actually like to live on, and the very real question about whether we should be building things this big at all. To understand Icon of the Seas, you have to understand an arms race that's been running for over a century. In 1912, the Titanic was the largest moving object ever built by human hands, 46,000 tons, carrying just over 2,200 people. It was considered so large, so advanced, that people genuinely believed it couldn't sink. Icon of the Seas is more than 5 times heavier than the Titanic. She carries almost 3.5 times as many people. And she isn't even trying to cross an ocean at record speed. She's trying to be a destination in her own right, one that just happens to float. That's the real shift. For most of the 20th century, cruise ships got you somewhere. Starting in the 2000s, cruise lines, led aggressively by Royal Caribbean, realized something. If the ship itself is the vacation, size stops being a logistics problem and becomes the entire selling point. More space means more water parks, more restaurants, more reasons to book. Every record-breaking ship generates its own press cycle, its own YouTube documentaries like this one, and that attention is in itself marketing that money can't buy. So in October 2016, Royal Caribbean placed an order with a Finnish shipbuilder, Meyer Turku, for a ship that would beat their own record-holding Oasis-class vessels, ships that were already the largest passenger vessels on Earth. The code name, Icon. Nobody, including the engineers who'd go on to build her, fully knew yet how you'd actually construct something this large. June 14th, 2021, a machine cuts a single steel plate on a shipyard floor in Turku, Finland. This is officially the birth of Icons of the Seas, and everything about the next 2.5 years is a lesson in a simple truth. You cannot build a ship this size in one place, in one piece, from one end to the other. Instead, engineers treat her like a jigsaw puzzle, assembled from giant prefabricated sections, some built at Meyer Turku itself, some built hundreds of miles away and floated in. The most dramatic example sits 400 miles south in Rostock, Germany. There's a separate shipyard called Neptune Werft is building the single most complicated component on the entire vessel, the engine room. Icon of the Seas doesn't run on traditional marine diesel. She runs primarily on liquefied natural gas, stored in tanks so large that in October 2021, when the first one is lowered into place, it weighs 307 tons and stretches 90 feet, practically a ship of its own. Rather than build that engine room inside the main hull, engineers construct the entire power plant, engines, tanks, machinery as its own free-floating watertight block. In the industry, it's called a ferru, a floating engine room unit. Essentially, a 100-meter mini-ship built independently so that hull construction and machinery work can happen in parallel instead of one after another. In December 2021, that engine room leaves Germany. Tugboats haul it out of Rostock, around Denmark, across the Baltic Sea, an entire power plant floating under its own buoyancy, arriving in Turku months before the rest of the ship exits to receive it. When it lands in the dry dock, it becomes the little foundation everything else gets built on top of. April 5th, 2022, the keel is laid, an old maritime tradition marking the symbolic starting point of the hull. By now, the engine room is already sitting in the dock. What really begins here is full-scale block erection, massive gantry cranes lowering pre-built sections, cabins, corridors, dining rooms into place one after another, month after month. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone. The cabins you'll eventually sleep in aren't built inside the ship at all. They are manufactured off-site as complete, finished modules, walls, plumbing, furniture, even the bathroom tile, and then craned into the hull like drawers sliding into a dresser. Over 18 months, a flat collection of blocks becomes something recognizably ship-shaped. The bow gets this unusual forward-leaning curve, not an aesthetic flourish, but a hydrodynamic one, designed to cut resistance and improve fuel efficiency at a size where every percentage point matters. December 9th, 2022, launch day. But there's no ramp, no bottle smashed against the hull. Instead, the dry dock itself floods slowly over hours until the hull becomes buoyant and lifts free from the supports that have held her for a year and a half. This is the first moment Icon of the Seas floats under her own displacement, still an unfinished shell, no funnel yet, exposed steel in places, but proof that the naval architect's math was right, months before a single guest cabin is finished. From here, thousands of workers spend months finishing everything a dry dock can't: interiors, paint, glass, plumbing, the miles of cabling that will eventually run entertainment systems, air conditioning, and Wi-Fi to thousands of cabins at once. March 15th, 2023, one of the 6 main Wärtsilä engines fires for the first time. For the chief engineer overseeing it, this single moment says more than almost any other milestone. The machinery this entire floating city depends on is finally alive. June 2023, Sea Trials. For the first time, Icon of the Seas leaves the shipyard entirely, not as a tourist attraction but as an engineering testbed. Engineers push her through hard turns, emergency stops, vibration testing, full power runs, measuring in open water whether 250,000 tons of steel behaves exactly the way it was calculated to on paper years earlier. A second, more extensive round of trials follow in the autumn. She returns to Turku for final adjustments. On November 27, 2023, after 2.5 years, Meyer Turku formally hands the ship over to the Royal Caribbean. And then, one last almost absurd detail: to leave the Baltic Sea, Icon of the Seas has to pass beneath Denmark's Great Belt Bridge. The clearance is tight enough that her funnel, the structure housing her exhaust stacks, is engineered to retract, lowering just enough to slide underneath before rising again on the other side. Even a ship this enormous has to bend to infrastructure built long before she existed. January 10th, 2024. After a stop in Cadiz, Spain, and a transatlantic crossing, she arrives at her home port, Port Miami. 2.5 years of steel cutting, transnational engine tows, dry docks, and sea trials condensed into a single ship arriving home for the first time. Once she's operational, the engineering story ends and a completely different one begins, because Icon of the Seas isn't really designed to be experienced as a ship. She is designed to be experienced as a city, divided into 8 distinct neighborhoods, each with its own identity, its own crowd, its own reason to exist. At the very front of the ship sits the Aquadome, a glass-domed space with 600 individual panels forming a sun-drenched lounge with 220-degree ocean views. By day, it's a food hall and a quiet retreat. By night, it transforms into an aquatic theater with performance diving alongside a 55-foot waterfall, the tallest at sea, enhanced by robotic arms and projection mapping. Behind it, Thrill Island houses the largest water park at sea. 6 record-breaking slides with names like Storm Surge and Hurricane Hunter, plus a climbing wall, sport court, and the ship's most talked about attraction, Crown's Edge. It's part obstacle course, part zip line, and it ends with guests harnessed into jumpsuits walking out onto a plank 150 feet above the ocean before the floor essentially disappears beneath them. Chill Island spans 3 decks and includes the cruise line's first ever swim-up bar, along with the largest pool at sea. The Hideaway, tucked above the family-focused Surfside neighborhood, is adult only, home to the first suspended infinity pool ever built on a cruise ship, cantilevered out onto the side with nothing but open air and ocean below it. And in the middle of all of it, genuinely strange to say out loud, is Central Park, an open-air neighborhood several decks up, filled with actual living trees and plants engineered to survive weeks at sea in salt water and shifting weather. None of this runs itself. Behind every neighborhood is a workforce of 2,350 crew members, more than double the headcount of most mid-sized hotels, running kitchens, engine rooms, medical bays, laundry facilities, processing tens of thousands of pieces of linen a day, and an entertainment division, staging full theatrical productions, including a Broadway-style production of The Wizard of Oz every single night. It's worth pausing on that number, 2,350. Because it points to something easy to miss behind the water slides and the waterfalls. This ship, at full capacity, holds nearly 10,000 human beings. That's a population larger than dozens of small American towns, living, working, and sleeping on a single structure for months at a time without ever touching land. Which raises a genuinely difficult engineering and logistical question. How do you feed, hydrate, and manage the waste of a floating population that size indefinitely in the middle of the ocean? The ship generates the vast majority of its own fresh water through onboard desalination, turning seawater into drinking water fast enough to supply thousands of showers, sinks, and pools every single day. Waste is processed on board through advanced treatment systems before any of it is ever discharged under international maritime regulations that are considerably stricter than what most people assume. Provisioning alone is its own operation. Tens of thousands of meals prepared daily, ingredients loaded by the ton before every voyage, calculated against exact guest counts down to the day. It's easy, watching the water slides and the stunt shows, to forget that underneath the spectacle, Icon of the Seas is fundamentally a piece of critical infrastructure, closer in complexity to a small self-sufficient municipality than to any hotel on land. Royal Caribbean markets Icon of the Seas as its most environmentally advanced ship yet, and on paper, there's a real case for that. She's the company's first vessel primarily powered by liquefied natural gas rather than traditional heavy marine fuel. She uses fuel cell technology to help generate electricity and fresh water, a first for the line. She's built to plug into shore power in port, cutting emissions to zero while docked, and her hull and bow shape were engineered specifically to reduce drag and improve fuel efficiency at scale. But that framing has real critics. Researchers at the International Council on Clean Transportation, the same organization behind the investigation that helped expose the Volkswagen's Dieselgate emissions scandal, has found that methane emissions from LNG-fueled ships are often higher than current regulations assume, because unburned methane can escape from these engines before combustion. Methane is an extraordinarily powerful greenhouse gas, far more potent than carbon dioxide over a short time frame. When The Guardian, the newspaper, put those findings to Royal Caribbean directly in an investigation published as Icon set sails on her maiden voyage, one of the ICCT's own researchers didn't mince words. It is, he said, greenwashing. Royal Caribbean's own position is more modest than the marketing suggests. Nick Rose, a vice president at the company, told The Guardian that when Icon was designed more than 7 years ago, LNG was considered the most promising fuel available at scale. In his words, "We consider it a transitional fuel that helps build flexibility into our ship design and also helps us more easily adapt to different types of fuels as the market evolves and other scalable alternatives are introduced." Rose pointed to biofuels, methanol, and shore power as part of that same long-term strategy. LNG, in other words, positioned as a bridge, not a destination. There's a smaller, quieter detail buried in that same reporting that's worth sitting with. Icon was actually designed to run fuel cells, a genuinely cleaner way to generate electricity without combustion to help power functions like the ship's elevators. But at the time of her launch, those fuel cells hasn't been installed due to a problem with suppliers. The most environmentally advanced ship in Royal Caribbean's fleet, in other words, set sail without one of its own greenest features actually turned on yet. And underneath the fuel type debate sits a simpler, harder to market question. Does building bigger ships, even efficient ones, actually reduce the industry's environmental footprint, or does it just concentrate a bigger footprint onto a single vessel? A more fuel-efficient ship that carries 3 times as many passengers doesn't necessarily mean 3 times less impact per person. It depends entirely on how the math is measured and by whom. This isn't a question this documentary can settle for you. It's an active ongoing dispute between the company that built her and the researchers studying her exhaust. And it's worth knowing both sides exist before you take either one at face value. No city this size, on land or at sea, runs without incident, and Icon of the Seas is no exception. Since entering service in January 2024, she's been connected to several serious incidents that are worth understanding honestly, without either minimizing or sensationalizing them. In May 2024, a passenger went overboard during a voyage and was later pronounced dead, a tragedy that, however it happened, is a stark reminder that even the most engineered, controlled environment at sea is still fundamentally the open ocean. Later that year, an electrical fire broke out while the ship was at dock at Costa Maya, Mexico, contained without serious injury, but a reminder that a floating city's infrastructure carries the same risks as any city's does. And in July 2025, a deeply disturbing incident unfolded when a crew member allegedly stabbed a co-worker during a personal dispute, then went overboard and did not survive. These events point to something most passengers never think about. What actually happens legally when something goes wrong on a ship like this? Icon of the Seas is registered, flagged in the Bahamas, which is standard practice across the cruise industry. Most major cruise lines flag their ships there or in places like Panama or Malta rather than in the country their passengers actually depart from. That means incidents at sea often fall under a patchwork of maritime law, flag state regulations, and international agreements that can be far less transparent and far less consistent than the criminal justice system passengers are used to on land. None of this makes Icon of the Seas uniquely dangerous. Cruise ships, statistically, remain one of the safer ways to travel, and incidents involving thousands of guests over hundreds of voyages are, by the numbers, rare. But scale cuts both ways. A vessel carrying nearly 10,000 people at once isn't just carrying more vacationers, it's carrying more of everything. More medical emergencies, more disputes, more mechanical complexity, and more of the very human unpredictability that no amount of engineering can fully design around. Here's the part that might be the most interesting of all. Icon of the Seas isn't the end of the story. She's the first of an entire class. Her sister ship, Star of the Seas, entered service in 2025, built on nearly the same 2.5-year construction rhythm. A third is already following, and Royal Caribbean has continued placing orders for additional Icon-class vessels beyond that, meaning the floating engine room strategy that towed a power plant across the Baltic Sea in 2021 is now essentially an assembly line. Meyer Turku dry dock is large enough to build 2 or 3 of these ships at once in staggered stages, meaning by the time you watch this, there's a real chance another sibling, Icon of the Seas, is already taking shape in that same Finnish dry dock, following the exact blueprint this documentary just walked through. Which leaves an open question, and it's the one worth sitting with as this documentary closes. At what point does bigger stop being impressive and start being the problem? Bigger ships mean more efficient fuel use per passenger on paper. They also mean more people concentrated in single points of failure. One fire, one storm, one mechanical fault, affecting 10,000 lives instead of 2,000. They mean more revenue, more jobs, more economic activity for the ports that host them, and also more strain on those same ports, more concentrated tourism, more pressure on fragile coastal environments built long before ships like this existed. There's no clean answer here, just a trajectory. One Royal Caribbean and the rest of the cruise industry show no signs of reversing. 250,000 tons of steel, nearly 10,000 people. An engine room built in one country, a hull built in another, assembled by a workforce spanning multiple nationalities, running on a fuel that's either the future or a marketing story, depending on who you ask. Icon of the Seas isn't remarkable simply because someone built a big ship. She's remarkable because of everything that had to be true at once for her to work. The engineering, the economics, the environmental trade-offs, the sheer logistics of moving a small city across open ocean week after week without most of the people on board ever thinking twice about how any of it actually happens.